Books are a uniquely magical doorway beyond the things we know. Not only do they tell us that dragons exist, but they can be beaten and overcome. In today's charged atmosphere, books show us we're not alone. They help us understand our heartbreaks and joys. They connect us to others who feel and have felt the same. Books and reading allow us to live 1,000 lives, sending us soaring into the world outside of ourselves, not to escape, but to survive. For it is often said that the greatest secrets seem to be found in the most unlikely places. Welcome to the podcast, Books Are Magical. Hi everyone, welcome to the Books Are Magical podcast. I'm Hannah. I am the solo co-host today. Rachel and Annalisa unfortunately weren't able to make it, but I am not actually alone. We have a very special guest that I am so excited to introduce to you all. We have author Jen Comfort with us today. We're talking about her newest book, What is Love, which is absolutely one of my top 3 books of the year. Just fantastic. But before I start gushing too much, I'm going to flip it over to Jen. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, joining me, I should say. And love to know a little bit about you and about the book.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hannah, first of all, for having me. I feel honored to have been invited. For everyone who's listening, my name is Jen Comfort, and I am the author of sexy, nerdy rom-coms that Kirkus has called charmingly bonkers. And my latest book that just came out on April 1st is called What is Love? And it is a rivals to lovers rom-com inspired by Jeopardy, even though the trivia show in the book is called Answers, so I don't get my ass sued. But it is about 2 not Jeopardy champions who are at the top of their game. So they're ranked 2 and 3 of all time, and they have very different play styles, and they have to team up to defeat the number 1 ranked of all time, Hercules McKnight. And in doing so, they are thrust into forced proximity, one of my personal favorite tropes. Pairs so well with opposites attract because of that tension. And through studying for this trivia contest, they learn to both shore up each other's strengths and then also, have to have some sexy times, because what better way to study?
That was the perfect summary. I could not have put it in a nutshell any better. So I first heard about this book at the Love Y'all Book Fest here in Atlanta. And I heard you talking at a panel and describing the book pretty much exactly the same way. And as you were talking, my mental list of all of my favorite things was just going check, check, check. And I was like, this book feels like it was written for me. And the minute I opened it, I was like, this book was 1000% written for me.
How did you know? Hannah, I did write it for you.
That's what the dedication at the beginning that said to Hannah. I didn't realize that was me.
Yeah, you didn't get that version. It's a special one. They were only selling it at Love Y'all Fest.
Oh my goodness. Being a nerd myself, being neurodivergent, being a trivia goblin, I was just this is all my favorite things in one. And I went into it with high expectations. It exceeded my expectations. And I think that nerd romance maybe isn't everyone's cup of tea, especially if you're not neurodivergent, but it was the perfect niche for me. And I think a lot of our audience will enjoy it as well. Do you mind if I dive into some questions?
Please do.
Okay, awesome. So, you said that this is, basically a rivalry around not Jeopardy. How did this storyline take shape for you? Did you kind of always have this idea in the back of your mind, or did it just pop into your head one day?
Well, I definitely watch Jeopardy pretty much every night. So it's definitely a big part of my life, but I hadn't really started considering it as a format for writing a romance novel until I was reading this book called Answers in the Form of Questions by Claire McNear. And it was essentially this nonfiction book where she goes through the whole history of Jeopardy and gives you all this behind the scenes, juicy gossip and information. I highly recommend it. But One of the things that I learned from that is that there was actually a couple who met on Jeopardy and they ended up getting married. And I was like, oh my gosh, bingo. What if it was like that? But we took a little bit of that, like Ken Jennings, James Holzhauer rivalry, or, how they both have very different play styles. And we took that and made it kind of integrated that with the romance plot. And for people who are listening who don't know who Ken Jennings and James Holzhauer are, and I realize this is like very niche information. They're kind of these two legendary players. Ken Jennings is ranked number 1 right now of all time in terms of games won. And he's also currently the Jeopardy host who replaced Alex Trebek after his sad passing. And then James Holzhauer kind of changed the game in terms of he came in and just started always going all or nothing or all in on his bets. And he was able to rack up an incredible amount of money in a very short amount of time. And so because of his like Vegas style gambling approach to playing Jeopardy, everyone else kind of had to adapt their approach.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that this came about from like something that you were already passionate about, something that you already loved, and just from like something you were reading already and interested in. I think you can sense that love and the passion all the way through. And as I was reading it, I was like, either she is the smartest person alive or she has done a shitload of research for this book, because there was so much trivia, so many behind the scenes things. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I've learned so much about Jeopardy just from reading this book. Did you do a lot of research?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so this is what I always tell people, because I have ADHD, and this book features a heroine with ADHD, which I think I forgot to mention at the beginning. But one of the things that I learned about writing a book with ADHD and actually being able to finish it is it needs to be about one of your special interests. And so I put a lot of my special interests into this. And because of that, I was able to do a lot of deep dives, which, in terms of writing a book, it actually kind of slowed it down a lot, because I would start researching some obscure trivia fact and end up spending 5 hours learning about hyenas. But that's also how Maxine learns in the book. And so that's how she became really good at Jeopardy and learning trivia, is she didn't study for it. She just went wiki walking or went, read like an entire biography of some random person and just picked up a lot of facts kind of like through osmosis. And that's sort of how this book was written, is I would read a cool fact and think, okay, this has nothing to do with what I just spent 4 hours researching, but now I have to put this into the book. So I am not really that smart. When I play Jeopardy, I get most of the questions wrong, but I still have fun doing it. So,
oh, that's so great. I really loved reading about all of Max's different strategies for learning. My background is actually in education to become an English teacher, which didn't actually end up working out. But one of the things that really bugged me was just how everything is based around rote memorization and nothing really accounts for different learning styles. And like hearing all these ways that Maxine was able to accumulate information, but also not just have it be just like a list of facts, but more seeing all the ways that they're interconnected. I was like, why are we not using some of this in schools? This is amazing. And I love that you were able to do some of that in your real life too. I think that it makes it more authentic, and it's not just like, oh, she's just a quirky character. Like, no, she has very real ways of learning these information.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned while I was researching this book is that I was researching a lot of stories about Jeopardy champions and how they became that way. And I found that there were a lot of Jeopardy champions who studied like that. You would think that they would just sit down with flashcards, and some people do. But a lot of people, even Ken Jennings, were the kind of people who would just absorb information for fun, where they're just constantly hoovering up trivia from the world around them. And that really got me into thinking about different learning styles and how being neurodivergent almost lends you an edge in terms of being better at trivia, because you are more attuned to those little random, seemingly not interconnected details about the universe. And just going back to your point about different education styles, I don't think they teach us like that in school. It's very linear. And that works probably really well for neurotypical people. Didn't work well for me. I was constantly tuning out and learning stuff that I wasn't supposed to be learning, but still learning, just, skipping to other pages in the books that I thought were more interesting.
Yeah, my husband we're pretty sure he has ADHD, and his experience almost exactly matches yours. That like he would get hyper focused on certain parts that were just like super interesting to him, and then anything else he's like, why am I here? And definitely the school system did not did not cater to that type of mindset at all, which I think is such a shame, because like how many kids out there, are not recognized by how intelligent they are just because they don't fit within these confines of how like a normal person would learn. I don't know. I could get on my soapbox about that for forever. So sorry.
I mean, I can too. I wrote a whole book about how our educational system for the longest time has just been built on training children to be little productivity machines, because that's what is valuable under capitalism. So, I could spend an hour just talking about my socialist philosophy here, but we won't derail the podcast with that.
It's all right. This podcast derails itself all the time. I did want to ask one thing that I especially love. One of the ways that Max learned and practiced for answers is the gauntlet. And I'm trying to figure out how to describe it without sounding like a complete idiot, but it's almost like a video game. It's brought to life, but it measures your response time. It measures your accuracy. Is something like that actually used for Jeopardy contestants too? Or was that solely you?
So I don't know if there's something exactly like that. It was, but the people have made custom programs where you can test your buzzer speed, and you can do mock games. And there are Quiz Bowl and other, non-Jeopardy tournaments that you can enter and stuff. So there are different ways to test it. But in terms of testing your buzzer speed, that is the one thing that I don't think that there's an easy way to do it, because the way that Jeopardy has it set up is it's a custom design where it locks you out if you buzz in more than 0.25, or if you buzz in early, it locks you out for 0.25 seconds. So being accurate and not just fast on the buzzer is incredibly important. And I think that when people are studying for Jeopardy, they focus so much on, do I know the information? And maybe 33%, if not more, of your success on Jeopardy is just, can you buzz in and get there before everybody else does? And so some people will just train on buzzer speed and they'll buzz in. And that's why when you watch Jeopardy, sometimes you'll see people buzz in and then they don't know the answer. They're just because they were more focused on buzzing in, and then they try to figure it out after they get it. Because it's such especially at more elite levels when you're playing in tournaments, everybody knows the answers. It's about whether or not you can get there first.
Wow. That is interesting that it's more than just pure knowledge. It also has to do with the body coordination too. That's really cool. I did not know that at all before reading this book.
Me neither. That's why I'm the more I learned about Jeopardy, I'm this is so fascinating, because people think it's just about knowledge, but it's one part knowledge, one part you're gambling, because of how much you gamble on Double Jeopardy and Final Jeopardy can completely change the game. You can be behind the entire game, but if you have a really smart and aggressive gambling approach, and you get those Double Jeopardy clues, and you get Final Jeopardy correct and everyone else gets it wrong, you can come from behind. And so that's basically how James Holzhauer changed the game, is he wasn't as accurate as Ken Jennings was, but he was a better gambler. So that's one part of it. And then buzzer speed is the third part. So you have to have all three parts of those things. And Maxine in the book has the buzzer speed and the gambling, but she doesn't have the knowledge, and Teddy has the knowledge. So together they work to put all three of those parts in.
Yeah. They were the perfect opposites attract relationship, and that you can perfectly see how they complement each other. And I hadn't seen a love at first sight romance maybe in a while. I tend to go for the slow burn and things like that. But I felt it works so well here, because it's just he sees her and he immediately knows she perfectly complements everything that I am. And then of course it takes her a little bit of time. But I loved how their strategies were so opposite. Their way of living was so opposite. And yet over time, you could kind of see them just almost melt into each other, for lack of a better analogy. I don't know if that works.
Yeah.
But it just, I don't know. It made my heart so happy. Did you have a hard time writing characters that were so opposite, considering that they are completely different in every aspect of their lives?
I think that's I do that in all of my books, because I think that tension of two people who seem on the surface to be very different, but at their core are kind of aligned in ways that go really deep. that's my catnip. Like, that is 100% my shit. Is I truly believe that if you're just looking for those surface things, you might not find that person that matches you. Because I think a good relationship is not just about being the same, it's about being complementary. As long as who you are in your heart is aligned, the other things can be like little puzzle pieces that fit together. I don't know if that was very eloquent. You'd think that as a writer, I could find better ways to express myself, but when I'm like verbally, I'm like, like these pieces, I'm using like hand gestures that people on the podcast can't see. I'm like, they go together like this.
It makes perfect sense to me. But yeah, no, I loved seeing how they fit together. I love the layers of each of them. That's something that as a reader, I always want nuanced, layered characters, and this was just like chef's kiss of that for both of them, because it almost like you see on the surface that Maxine is hyper confident and the life of the party, but she has insecurity and she has trauma, and then Teddy is very reserved and comes from this high background, but really he's just a simple man who loves his routine but also feels like he's boring. And it just like I don't know. I just want to give you huge kudos for that, because I loved them both. I loved the layers of it, and it kept me reading because I wanted to find out more about them.
Yeah, I mean, deep down, like, no matter how different they are in their surface and in their backgrounds, they're just nerds, right? And at the end of the day, you're just looking for that nerd that likes the same thing that you do. And I honestly, I wrote this book before I met my current partner. And even while I was writing this insta love thing, which I never really believed in, I'm a little bit cynical. I'm divorced. I've been I did the dating apps for far too long. So that can really build some darkness in your soul. Despite the fact that I was,
truth.
Writing romance novels. I was like, well, I know I shouldn't be quick to judge, but why are you living up to all of my low expectations? But then I met my current partner, and I really did fall in love with him on the first date. We ended up talking for 8 hours, and I remember telling everyone that I went to all my friends after our first date, and I was like, I think I'm gonna marry this fucking nerd. Like, I think this is the one. And I was right. We are gonna get married now. And so, after that, I was like, you know what? I think that you really can know. And Teddy knew deep down that Maxine was for him, but it was more of a shallow knowing. He knew it, but he just didn't really understand why. And so I don't think insta love is really a good label for it. It's insta knowing, and then the love develops.
I 100% agree with you in that. I think anyone going into this should know that what you're walking into, that it is insta love, but also take it with a grain of salt. I also had fell in love on my first date with my husband.
Really?
I had a very similar experience. We had a crazy 24-hour date, which is not what I expected. And
wait, tell me about it. I want to hear it. And I'm sure people listening to this podcast want to hear it. That's why
my goodness.
We're all romance.
I know, that's true. It's kind of a freaky coincidence. So my husband and I are both from Georgia. He moved to Houston a month before I moved to Houston, and neither of us knew each other at the time. We both started working at this very small little company, hole-in-the-wall company, and ended up there because it's a very small company. He's like, oh, cool, new person, new friend. He saw that I had nerdy tattoos. I saw that he had nerdy tattoos, and he was like, let's go hang out. I'd like to get to know you. And I was like, cool. So I hadn't actually truly met him, which looking back, I'm like, wow, I was just taking chances. That is not my MO at all, but here we are. So we meet up, and we, within 5 seconds, realize we are both from the same area of Georgia. He grew up in the town that I went to college in. We have friends in common, have been to all the same places, but never once met until we both moved across the country at the same time to start working at this little company. And we just started talking. And as that night was going on, I was just like, this is him. We were just clicking on an insane level. And I think we met up at 8:00 at night. By 1 a.m, because we were at a bar, he was like, do you want to date me? And I was like, yes, 100%.
First date, he's like, all right, you're the one.
Yeah, he's all in. And I was like, all in.
Yes.
And then he went to drop me off at the apartment I was staying at with a roommate, and she had another person over and was basically like, you can't come in. At this point, it's 2 a.m. I have lived in this city for less than a month. I know no one. So he's driving away, and I'm calling him like, can I come stay with you tonight?
Oh my goodness.
I was like, I don't do this. This is not who I am. I literally know no one else. I have nowhere else to go.
Oh my
so
God.
I ended
it's
up,
like the universe was conspiring, or your roommate was in on it.
It was. I stayed at his place. We literally stayed together for breakfast, lunch, and he dropped me off at dinner the next day. So It was a 24-hour date. And just the entire time we would have moments where we just look at each other like, how are you you? And I'm like probably blushing so bad right now, but it's just, I do think that it doesn't happen for everyone, but there are times when you have that just magical meeting someone, and that kind of gave me a whole new perspective on romance, that like maybe I shouldn't be so cynical. This happened to me. It can happen to Teddy and Maxine. So everyone out there, love at first sight is possible.
It is.
And it's great.
We weren't paid to say this by Big Romance. It really is.
Exactly. Honestly, if Big Romance wants to put me on their payroll, I'll say whatever they want me to say.
Yeah, honestly, hire me. Hire me.
Okay. Yeah, that fell down that rabbit hole real fast. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I felt a lot of kinship to their characters, and then felt very connected to them through my own experience, through them being nerds, and just loved them. And then the spice, which had me legitimately fanning myself. Just, oh my gosh. Did you have a favorite spicy scene when you were writing this?
Definitely the map scene. That just does it for me. I read Charlotte Stein's The Professor, probably almost a decade. I don't know when it came out. Shortly after it came out. And I was like, okay, Professor Kink unlocked. I didn't have any hot professors when I was in school. Unfortunately, or probably fortunately for me, I don't need that in my life. Very problematic IRL, but in books, it's completely different. And I was still very conscious of okay, I don't actually want her to be his real student. There is just this weird power dynamic. It gets weird.
Yes.
Some people can be really, I want to write books that are escapism. So I try not to put a lot of stuff in my books that might be okay, this is going to bring up some dark feelings for you. So I was like, okay, they have that professor-student almost role play dynamic, which I think is really hot, because I just think learning is sexy. And so what could be sexier than him teaching her all the different bodies of water in Asia, saline, while also, giving her a reward reward-based learning system, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she loved those rewards. I love those rewards for her. Yeah. That was amazing. I mean, I feel like every spicy scene in the book was amazing. That one definitely stood out. But it all comes back to the tension. You did an amazing job of building the tension between the two characters, where they almost kissed and then stopped. And I was just hitting my book against the wall, come on.
Honestly, it kind of bothers me in books when people will do that. I'm just please just give me, you can still have there be tension and still have them do stuff, because if you don't want to have everything be perfect right away. But in my previous books, I definitely did more of a slow burn, and even I get bored with that. I'm just come on, let's go. So I spotted them, at least in this book, they start off with a kiss right away, and it's really hot. And then she comes over to his house, I think early, right early in the second part of the book, where she's hey, we're going to talk about you training me, but also now we can't resist. And there's a thunderstorm outside, and we're just dry humping in your office chair just to keep things spicy. I didn't want them to go too long without any action, because I also knew that the last third of the book was going to be, okay, so just to start at the beginning, this is a very disjointed explanation, but I had laid out this book to be kind of in the same format as a Jeopardy episode. So there's single Jeopardy round, double Jeopardy round, and then final Jeopardy. So it's going to be 3 parts. And so the first single Jeopardy round is sort of them meeting, establishing the conflict, establishing what's happening. Double Jeopardy round is them training. And then the final Jeopardy round was going to be the actual competition in LA. So when they get to LA, I knew that while they're on set, there weren't going to be as many sexy time opportunities. So I really needed to kind of compress it into the second half of the book, into the double Jeopardy round. Although I still found a way. I looked at the blueprints of the Jeopardy set and found where they could do some light butt stuff in the stairwell. So I want you to know that for everyone who reads this book, I checked the blueprints and that fire exit stairwell really is there. So.
Oh my gosh. And now every Jeopardy contestant knows.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing too, is like there are a lot of people who've really been on Jeopardy. So I wanted this to be as accurate as possible so that I wouldn't get called out for like, you really couldn't hook up there.
You're like, excuse you, I checked and you can. You're welcome.
Yeah. It was my dream while I was writing this book to try to go to get to film an episode. Or you can get like a free ticket to be in the audience for a Jeopardy episode, but the timing just never worked out. And I was on a really tight, 2.5 month deadline for this book. So I just didn't have time. So that's why I was sitting there at 1 a.m, zooming in on blueprints from the Stony Pictures Studios lot.
Oh my goodness. I love it. I mean, like you said, you had this blueprint and I love that it was tied to Jeopardy too. That's just amazing. Are you much of a planner as a writer, or do you feel like it's more organic that you're just writing and it's just coming out of you?
So I've been very fortunate because up until now, my publisher or my editor was really kind of laissez-faire with my writing. She was kind of like, you know what, give me an idea and go write it and come back to us with the finished project. So I had a lot of leeway in terms of I would give them like a brief synopsis of here's what the book is going to be about. But it was more of like in Pirates of the Caribbean, how they say that the rules are more like guidelines, really. That's kind of how I look at my outline is I have the outline there. I know how it's going to end, not just in terms of they end up together, although that does make it easy. But I knew kind of that I was going to have this structure with the actual tournament being at the end. But then how they get there, I tend to take a lot of detours. So I'll be writing and then I'll have an idea of something I want to include and then I can kind of revise as I go. So it's mostly pantsing, but it's like the structure is there in my head.
Gotcha. Do you feel like being a writer is more challenging with having ADHD, or do you feel like that almost makes it easier in that way?
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons, right? So one of the things that I really like about having ADHD is that I have an easy time connecting really disparate concepts into and like figuring out how they might go together. So I think it makes me more creative. I am able to problem solve really well because again, I'm like taking I can hold a lot of different ideas in my head in separate places and then see the web that connects all of them. But it is really hard for me, and I think a lot of people with ADHD, to feel that motivation sometimes, where it's really hard to just get started, especially if you lose momentum. And if there is not an immediate reward that you get from it right away, sometimes I'm just kind of easily distracted by other stuff, and I can't force that hyperfixation zone where I'm just writing for 5 hours straight with no break and forgetting that I have a human body with needs that needs water and food and bathroom breaks. Because that's the sweet spot, man. I mean, I can get in that. I can bust out some of the best work. But if I'm not feeling it, it's really hard to force it. And so one of the things that I learned is that if I'm feeling bored with my book, then I'm not going to want to write it. So that's why if you read my books, they're really kind of bonkers. There's always something exciting or fun happening in each chapter. There's not a lot of quiet conversations and I really do enjoy books that are like that, where it's more just about the character's internal growth. But I don't think I could write it because as I'm writing it, I just I'm something exciting needs to happen here. I'm going to be bored and then I'm going to organize my underwear drawer instead of writing.
I mean, there is character growth though, because it just happens in kind of a maybe non-traditional way with Teddy having to jump out of an airplane and that changing his whole perspective on life. And then I don't want to give too much away, but the scene on the stairs for Maxine, that I feel is some character growth there. So I liked your approach to that. And that totally makes sense now hearing from you that you can't have these long chapters of just internal monologue. that's not, not natural for you, not natural for the characters. It has to just happen in the moment. And I honestly really, really liked that. It felt very real.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I really realized that's why I do it until just now as I'm explaining this to you. I'm like, yeah, I guess everybody's having these emotional revelations while they're doing really exciting things like jumping out of a plane or having sex. Then all of a sudden, that's where the growth happens, is something really dramatic is happening at the same time.
But I mean, that's like life. We don't have moments where we're just, well, let me sit on the couch for 3 hours and change something internally. So I feel like that's very real, at least for me. Maybe other people do that. That's not how I am. You answered a lot of the questions I had already. I just want to point out Hercules McKnight, the villain. That is like the perfect villain name. The minute I saw his name pop up, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, love this. Because Hercules and knights are supposed to be heroes, so it's almost like the opposite of what you would expect. But oh my gosh, he was so sleazy. And I loved him as a villain. I'm guessing you picked the name intentionally?
I mean, a lot of times when I come up with, I don't even know where I come up with names. Sometimes it'll just be like, I'll just be spitballing and I come up with silly names that I think are funny. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's it. That's the one. And I especially wanted, because his character is like very scammy. He's like kind of one of those, like, he's created a persona for himself. And so I like the idea that Hercules McKnight could absolutely be a fake name. Like maybe it's his stage name or just like a name he came up for himself that he thought sounded like really 100%. So I was like, this would totally, because no one's really going to name their kid Hercules McKnight. Like, why would you do that to a child? But if you were picking that because you were like this really ego, like maniac weirdo, then you would absolutely pick the name Hercules McKnight for yourself.
100%. And Teddy, I love that he kept correcting people calling him Theodore to Teddy, because I was just like, that's right, because you're just a big teddy bear.
You're just a big teddy bear.
You're a big cinnamon roll. I love Teddy.
The reason Teddy is named Teddy Ferguson was entirely so I could make a Turd Ferguson joke, because I wanted to reference SNL from the SNL episode. So I'm very mature. I named my characters in Midnight Duet, my prior book. I named a character Waldo just so I could do a Where's Waldo joke. So if you're ever wondering, is this character named this for some really immature, childlike reason? The answer is yes. I absolutely will create an entire character for one joke. And Maxine is named Maxine because I really like Natasha Lyonne in Russian Doll. And her friend's name is Maxine, so...
I'm just imagining as you're writing, you're just giggling to yourself, writing Turd Ferguson.
Absolutely, 100%. Like, Turd Ferguson. It's a funny name.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I think my last question, completely different, serious tone here. At the very end, one of the answers contestants says something about emotion versus intelligence, that you don't have to have one or the other, that really... you need both. And I think that was my favorite quote of the whole book, and I'm absolutely misquoting it atrociously, so I'm so sorry, because I don't have the actual quote in front of me. I'd love to hear your perspective on, showing emotion versus intelligence, and how do we balance those two things?
Yeah, so that quote that is used there, I think is based on an Emily Dickinson quote. I could be misquoting it too now, even though I wrote this whole scene, but it's the quote that says, ever since birth, crying is a sign that we are alive. Or not a sign that we are weak, it's a sign that we are alive. And I think that is so important, because so often there's this really stereotyped, and I think also heavily influenced by capitalism, this vision of intelligence as being almost emotionless. But the more that I have gone to therapy and also read a lot of books, I'm starting to realize that intelligence is so much more, right? There's different types of intelligence. And I think the most intelligent people that I know are the ones who actually weigh both emotion and logic at the same time. And they are not actually contrasting principles. They are like siblings. They're hand in hand. And you can't really be a whole and intelligent person without both of them. And I think trivia is a really great example of both of those things combined, is that it's not, nothing exists in a vacuum. And if you try to make intelligence exist in a vacuum, you are cutting out so much else of what makes us human. And what trivia does is it like pulls in all of these different parts of the universe and it's like, here's these things that don't seem to connect and make sense, and here, we're going to give them meaning. So I think facts without meaning are not as valuable, or facts without meaning are just data, right? But in order to have knowledge, that's when you include meaning and a fact together. Very convoluted way to say it. But.
No, I mean, I love it. That was my favorite quote from the book. I think one of my favorite quotes I've read so far this year was both that where they were talking about emotion versus intelligence, but also the quote where Maxine's talking to Dr. Love and she's explaining why she loves trivia, which is exactly what you were just saying, that it makes meaning out of just rote facts. And I love that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Is there anything that you're, working on now? Anything in the horizon for another book? Or are you just kind of enjoying, finishing What is Love?
Well, I took the last 9 months off of writing, which I used to be really embarrassed to tell people about because it felt like somehow I was failing, not just for me, but also for readers who are like, when can we read another book? And I was just really burned out. That I really enjoyed writing What is Love, but it was a lot to do in a short period of time. And then after that, I just needed some time to just like be a person and catch up on work and life. And I did a lot of traveling and I met my partner, and I just, for some reason, 9 months went by without me even noticing it. And I hadn't sat down to write anything new. And part of it also, I wasn't really under contract anymore. So I didn't know what I wanted to write next because I didn't know, did I want to stay with my publisher and continue working with them? Do I want to like branch out and try revising this old fantasy thing that I initially went on sub with? That's like basically like a sapphic Pirates of the Caribbean meets Jurassic Park, which I loved.
Oh, hell yeah.
But it needs a lot of revision. It was, I wrote it almost 6 or 7 years ago now. So, I'm looking at it now. I'm like, oh, some of this writing is really cringe. I need to kind of overhaul this whole thing. So I started working on that, and then I got like a little bit down the path and decided that this was a big project that I didn't want to take on. My heart is still in rom-coms right now. And so I am currently in the process of putting together like proposal packages of like, here is a book idea. Here's a synopsis in the first 6 chapters. Who wants to buy this and give me money to write it? So it's kind of daunting because my ideas are a little bit weird and out there. Like one of the ideas that I'm working on is a sequel. Well, not a sequel to Midnight Duet, my second book, but he uses one of the secondary characters, and it's just about like 2 gothy weirdos. And a part of me is like, I don't know if this is mainstream enough. It might be a little too weird for most people, but it's the story that I really want to tell. And so I hope that like my passion for it will show through and that there'll be enough other weirdos out there who want to read it.
I mean, I think for this book for sure, and for everything else, I like mainstream books, but sometimes they just don't hit like these ones do, where it's just like, you feel like this was written exactly for my tastes. So I will read whatever you put out next, whether it is gothic or not. And I think that there's always an audience for those kinds of books for sure. So I hope that someone picks it up for you.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Thank you so much again for talking with us. Again, I keep saying us, for talking with me, for coming here. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope that everyone who listens to this knows they need to pick up What is Love immediately from their local bookstore. So I guess until next time, audience, may your reading adventures always take you to new horizons, and we'll see you on the next page.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Books Are Magical. Please connect with us through our email, booksaремagicalpodcast@gmail.com, or through our Instagram direct messages at booksaремagicalpod. And until next time, open doors, turn pages, and connect with the world around you.